And now we're on Daf Pei Beis Amid Beis. Umas Nisan, however, the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi holds that we have a very limited scope for Ini Nefesh. And in this particular case, where she prohibits upon herself getting anah from so-and-so, Ploni Almoni, that's not qualified. That doesn't qualify as Ini Nefesh because she can benefit from everybody else. Yom Rav Huna, now we're going to invoke again the principle of Rav Huna that we saw in Omen Aleph, that Kule, Pirkin, Rav Yossi, that the entire parak and all the Mishnayos therein are attributed to Rav Yossi. And the Gemara now adds, Umay ein yochel lahafer. What was Rav Yossi's intention when he said that the Baal cannot be made for the Nedarim of his wife if she took a neder, miploni or michanvani ploni? That's mishum Ini Nefesh. You should know that it wasn't that Rav Yossi would completely exclude and invalidate the hafara of the Baal. It doesn't come under Ini Nefesh. However, hold Mayfair Nedarim shebeino lebeino. As a result of this neder that she took, the Baal is going to have to be toreach and find another medina from which he can supply with peiros, or he has to find himself a different chenvani. That's a tremendous tircha. So therefore, this neder certainly falls into the category of Nedarim shebeino lebeino, which would mean that he can provide a temporary hafara that will only be operative and valid for the time that he's married to. But after the divorce, the neder is chal, vis-a-vis a second Baal or anyone else. Now in the Mishnah on Daf Ayin Tes, the Mishnah says Elu Nedarim shu meifir. And which Nedarim, asks the Mishnah, does the Baal have authority to be meifir from his wife's Nedarim? Yesh b'minui nefesh. Now the Gemara wants to know if a woman took a neder in which she prohibited two different items, like two different loaves of bread, but only one of them is inui nefesh. Can the Baal be made for the entire neder? Or do we say no, only that chelek, that kikar of the two kikros, which has Ini Nefesh, that's what he has the power to be made for. But the neder is still binding vis-a-vis the other kikar. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Nadra b'shtei kikros. So she declared konam shtei kikros elu alai. There were many kikros on the table, and she points to two kikros and singles them out. And she says, these shtei kikros olai b'konam. Now we're going to see that one of these two kikros is a very good, healthy, loaf of bread that's made from refined flour. And if she doesn't eat the kikar, then she'll suffer a certain level of Ini Nefesh, again, according to the Chachamim. The other kikar, on the other hand, is what's called pas kiba, which means it's not a pas nekia, it's not well-refined flour, but it's a pas kiba. Most people, including her, do not usually eat a pas kiba. So the fact that she took a neder on herself to enjoin herself from eating a pas kiba, that's not inui nefesh. But the question is, since the Baal can be made for that kikar, that is a pas nekia, does that give him the ability to be made for the entire neder, even on that other kikar, which is kibar, and therefore doesn't have any nefesh? So, achas misana, from enjoining herself on one kikar, we call it a pas nekia. She will suffer in nefesh. Well, achas, but as far as the other kikar is concerned, ein misana. There's no eating nefesh because she doesn't eat that kind of a inferior quality bread. The Rosh offers an alternative scenario in which she doesn't have another loaf of bread to eat today, but all she needs for today is that all that she can possibly eat today is that one kika. So if she enjoys herself from that one single kika and she doesn't have another kika for today's food, for today's breakfast, lunch, and supper, she will suffer in nefesh. But let's say, for example, if the Baal will be Mayfair, the neder, in a case, let's say, where she has two pitos, so if he's going to be Mayfair only on one pass, that's not even nefesh because she has access to another pass. Now, in a few minutes, we're going to try to understand this sugya in light of the sugya that we learned earlier in the second Nedarim called Neder Shehuta Miktaso Huta Kulo. Neder Shebatel Miktaso Batel Kulo. But right now, for the time being, Rabbi, we're going to leave that on the back burners. And we're going to learn the sheet of Shmuel. Shmuel says, "Mitokshu meifel lisana meifel l'she'eno misana." Once we give him the right to be made for part of the neder, one kikar, that kikar nikia pas nikia, which is inui nefesh, then he can be made for the other part of the neder, vis-a-vis the second kikar, even though there's no inui nefesh. And the Gemara later on Daf Pei Zayin is going to derive Shmuel's halacha from a pasuk in Parshas Nedarim. It says V'isha Yifeirena. Yifeirenu means the Gemara derives from this pasuk that the Baal cannot be made for half of the neder. He can only be made for the entire neder. So if you're going to tell me, argue Shmuel, that he can't be made for on the pas kibar because it's not inu nefesh, then he won't be able to be made for on the pas nikia where there is inu nefesh because it's an all or nothing proposition and eina bal yochel for chetzian neder. So now you're going to come to the conclusion that even vis-a-vis the kikar, which has inu nefesh, he cannot be made for. And therefore we have no, and we know that that's not true. The Torah says that the Baal could be made for neder sheish by inu nefesh. So it must mean that the Baal could be made for, says Shmuel, even the other pas, the pas kiba, even that part of the neder that doesn't have inu nefesh. Because if he cannot do so, then he can't be made for the part that's in inu nefesh, and the Torah gave the Baal the authority to be made for nidrei inu nefesh. That's Shmuel's opinion. Rav Asi Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Rav Asi has a tradition in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that he disagrees with Shmuel, and he holds that Meifel Misana, Ve'enu Meifel L'Sheinu Misana. That Rabbi Yochanan never accepted this principle that you cannot be Meifel part of the neder. You could be Meifel whatever you possibly can be Meifel. And if that other pas kibar is not a davar sheish bo yini nefesh, the Baal doesn't have the ability to be made for that. And when the Torah says he has to be made for the entire neder, that only applies in a case where the Baal is made for whatever he possibly could be made for. That's okay. In other words, if he only decides, he could be made for the whole neder and he decides to be made for half the neder, Rabbi Yochanan agrees to Shmuel, that he cannot do. But if he's only capable, he's only potentially able to be made for part of the neder, then according to Rabbi Yochanan, that part of the neder, he can be made for even though the neder on the other part will still remain valid. And therefore you have hafara l'chatzoyin according to Rabbi Yochanan. Again, only on the condition that the Baal maximized his authority and he was made for whatever he possibly could be made. If, again, as I emphasized before, if he could have been made for the entire neder and he only chooses to make for part of it, that he can't do. There's no pick and choose, even according to Rabbi Yochanan. Now, the rest of today's discussion is about the machlokas here between Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan. But I just want to finish the daf and then go back to that. Just change the order a little bit. Ikra the Amri. Another tradition has that the story of Rav Asi was a little bit different. It wasn't that Rav Asi transmitted the Torah of his Rebbe Rav Yochanan, but rather Boy Minei Rav Asi Rav Yochanan. Rav Asi presented as a question in front of Rav Yochanan, Nadra, Nishtei Kikros, V'achas Misana, V'achas Eina Misana Mal. If there's an inui from absence from one kikar, not from the other, what's the din? Can the Baal be made for one part of the neder, only vis-a-vis that achas, which is Misana? Or do we say that his hafar is chal on the entire neder, on Malay? And Rabbi Yochanan responded to Rav Asi's query, and he says, made for Misana Veda Beis Misana Misana, that he can be made for a partial hafar, meaning chatzonim, on that part which has the nefesh, that kikar nakia pasiki, and the hafar will not be chal on the other part, meaning the balance of the neder, which is the kikar kibar, where there's no inu nefesh. Okay, let's now, before we finish the daf, let's take a break and try to study this machlokas between Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan. We'll start with the Ran. The Ran says that Shmuel's logic is that if there are two parts to the neder, and both parts are on divrei machal, on food stuff, then the part that's not inu nefesh, which we call the paskibar, is nigrar. Okay, that's the key word here, nigrar. Achar achelik sheyesh bo inu nefesh, meaning there's one entity of one indivisible neder that is integrated into one whole. And if part of the neder has the status of inu nefesh, then according to Shmuel, once he's made for the neder, the hafar is chal on the entire neder. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says that there's no din of nigra, and we don't have to integrate the neder into one whole vis-a-vis the hafar, but rather we can divide up the neder into its smaller parts, its segments, this kikar and that kikar, and the hafar could be chal on one part of the neder. The Ran himself is not so thrilled with this interpretation, which he quoted in the name of his Rebbeim, because he doesn't understand, according to Shmuel, this halach of nigra. Tosfos has a different explanation of Shmuel, and Shmuel indeed is implementing the principle that we learned earlier in Masechet Nedarim, neder shehuta miktsasa huta kula. And Shmuel says that even though there's only one half of the neder, that one particular kikar, which is inu nefesh, the Baal is oker the neder meikaro, and therefore we're going to apply the principle of huta miktsasa, huta kula, which means that a woman or anybody who takes a neder doesn't have in mind to accept that only half the neder should be valid. So here, in the Tosfos Shita, we're seeing something that's radically different than everything we've been assumed since day one in Masechet Nedarim. And that is, we always assume that Hatorah is oker the neder meikaro, whereas hafar is only mikan al haba. Shmuel disagrees, and he equates hafaras habal with hataras hara, and he applies the principle of huta miktsasa huta kula, which means that the neder through hafara is nekar meikaro. The Rosh actually raises this question. Why in this sugya between machlokas between Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, we don't find that the Gemara raises the klal, the issue of the klal, neder shuta miktsasa the kula, and the Rosh says just the opposite of the Tosfos, and that is that hataras chacham is oker saneder l'mafreya, whereas hafaras habal is only matter the neder mikan lahava. The Rosh himself offers the following suggestion. Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan are arguing as to whether we consider this neder on shtei kikros as one neder or as two different nedarim. According to Shmuel, it's one neder. And therefore, once he's mefer that part of the neder which is eating nefesh, he can be mefer even the part that's not eating nefesh. Rabbi Yochanan holds, according to the Rosh, that we don't consider this as one whole neder, but rather it's two nedarim. And he can only be made for one chelik of the neder because that's a separate neder, and it has eating nefesh. The Ritva says that our sugya is talking about a case where she took two nedarim, but zechar zeh. First, she took a neder on one kik, and then she took a neder on another kik. And nevertheless, Shmuel holds that it can be made for even that neder that has no inui nefesh. And here the Ritva formulates a new principle. Mitoch shezichsa Torah es habal l'hofer b'chelik sheyesh bo inui nefesh nasna lo zchus l'hofer gam b'chelik she'en bo inui nefesh. And why is that so? According to the Ritva, although there's no inui nefesh for her, but a poor person would suffer inui nefesh if he couldn't eat the pas kiba. And therefore Shmuel holds that there's a mitoch. I don't know another word, other than mitoch. We've had the word mitoch many times in Shas. Right? That, let's say on Yontif you could prepare food for the orchim, so therefore you can prepare food even for the possibility that some orchim will come. And here it's a different kind of mitoch, in which we're expanding the schus habal, which the Torah invested in the Baal to be made for one part of the neder, meaning the neder that she took first, let's say. Therefore, we expand the Baal's schus to be made for even that part which is not eating nefesh. And that is because even that part that's not eating nefesh does have a potential of even eating nefesh le'acherim for others. Okay, to finish up the daf for today, plus a little bit for tomorrow's daf, Esvei, Rav Asi raised the following objection to his Rebbe, Rabbi Yochanan, that a Baal could only be made for that chilik that has inui nefesh from a Mishnah in Nazir, or Daf Kav Gimel Mishnah says, Oisha shed Nadra ben Nazir, Oisa shosa yayin v'tamel mesim. She deliberately violates the Iser Shtias Yayin and Tuvis Mesim. And here we're on Daf Pei Gimel. Her raises so pegas to our boy. If there was Adam and Asra, she'll get Malchus for violating the Iser Shtias Yayin and Tuvis Nazir. Hey for Labaila, however, if a Baal was made for the Nidres Ridus, Behilo Yoda Shehefela, she was totally unaware of the Baal's Hafara. She did all this with Mason, thinking that she was violating her Easter Nazirus. And so Fegus is our boy. She got off the hook here. She will not get Malchus. She did not violate the Easter Shtias Yayin and Tuma because the Baal was made for the Neder. Fact the Gemara, the E Amit Meifel Misana, the Ein Meifel Shana Misana, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that is only a firm part. Now, with regard to Yayin, with a Nazir, this part that has in Nefesh, that's the Yayin itself, and there's other parts which are also included in the lav of Nazir, but yet they don't have Ini Nefesh. And that's what the Gemara says now in their argument against Rabbi Yochanan. Dilma, min yayin de islay tzara, heferla, min chartzon umin zag lo heferla. The lo is la tzara, v'tisfoges arbaim. In other words, the language of the Brisa indicates that whatever violation she violates of Yayin, and we'll see that that includes 3 different categories, that would generate Malchus in a case where the Baal wasn't Mefer. But on the other hand, if the Baal was Mefer, that no matter what part of the Neder she violates with regard to Yayin, she doesn't get Arbaim, she doesn't get Malchus. And as we said before, Yayin divides up into 3 parts. One is called Chartzon, which is the pit of the grape. One is called Zad, which is the covering over the grape, the skin around the grape. And the other is the Yayin itself, the liquid that is extracted from the grapes. And as far as Inu Nefesh is concerned, only the absence from Yayin, from the liquid, from the wine itself, constitutes Inu Nefesh, not Zag and not Chartzon. So the Gemara is asking now, according to you, Rav Yochanan, if she would swallow the Chartzon or the Zag deliberately, then she should get Malchus, despite the fact that the Baal was Mefer HaNaziris, because his Hafara power, according to Rav Yochanan, is limited to the Inu Nefesh part, which means to the Yayin part. And the rest and the balance of the Isa that she took upon herself in Naziris, of Chartzon and Zag, that itself is not Inu Nefesh, and therefore the Hafara HaBaal is not Chal vis-a-vis those parts. So we see here a clear-cut proof to Shmuel that since the Baal could be made for Naziris with regard to Yayin, because Yayin has Inu Nefesh, then we extend his authority to be made for even with regard to Chartzon and Zag that ain't Behem Inu Nefesh, because we see it as one total indivisible. And that's going to lead us to Rav Yosef's breakthrough principle called Ein Nazirus L'Chatzon. The Mirz Hashem, that will cover Bli Neder tomorrow. Okay then? So let me wish you a great day.